My name is Major General Laura Whitaker, United States Marine Corps, and on the day my father married his second wife in front of 100 people at the American Legion Hall in Fredericksburg, Virginia, I heard him point at me and say, "She's nothing but a bastard." I wish I could tell you that after 54 years of wearing this uniform, of carrying 2 silver stars on my collar, those words slid right off me. But they didn't. They landed sharp, like barbed wire coiled around my chest, and they stayed. The room was already loud with Conway Twitty spinning from the DJ's battered speakers, and cousins drinking Budweiser from plastic cups. Cheap wine, laughter, a few kids running between folding chairs. It was the kind of messy joy people expect from small-town weddings. Then Dad raised his glass, and in one sentence, he stripped all that noise away. You could feel the air change. Forks froze against paper plates. Aunt June gasped, "Hal, for God's sake!" Somebody chuckled, thinking it must be a joke. But the laughter withered quick. He wasn't joking. He said it again, firmer this time, like a man setting the record straight. My father puffed his chest, proud in his baggy rented suit, and pulled Ashley close. Ashley, the daughter of his new wife, Denise. She was 26, her hair sprayed high, her pink dress straining at the seams. A smirk lingered on her lips, like she'd been waiting for this moment all night. "This," Dad declared, arm tight around her shoulders, "this is my real daughter, the one who carries my name right." Denise clapped, teeth bright under fluorescent lights. A couple of cousins joined in, awkward and thin applause. And me? I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. That's never been my way. I held a paper cup of coffee that tasted like burnt grounds and styrofoam. My hand didn't tremble. The Corps taught me discipline, but truth is, I'd been practicing it long before enlistment papers. I set the cup down on the bar and told the kid in the bow tie vest behind it, "Water's fine. Thanks." My voice was steady, though my throat burned. Then I walked out. The parking lot was still hot from the day. Asphalt shimmered with trapped heat, and cicadas shrilled from the pines like they were mocking the silence I carried with me. A couple of old vets leaned near the door, smoke curling from their Marlboros. They looked at me, then away, because folks never know what to do when humiliation is hanging off someone like a second skin. I leaned against my car, a dull gray Chevy Malibu, and took in a breath so deep it hurt. The smell of cut grass and spilled beer tangled with smoke. Inside, laughter rose again, the crowd adjusting, pretending nothing had happened. I pictured Dad dancing stiff-legged with Denise, his hands sliding down the satin of her gown. I pictured Ashley basking in the glow of attention, telling anyone who'd listen that she was a Marine too, stationed at Quantico. She wasn't lying, but she wasn't telling the whole truth either, because just last week, her name had crossed my desk in a report about falsified travel receipts, not career-ending, if she owned up, but serious enough to demand accountability. I said nothing about it then. That moment wasn't about Ashley's paperwork. It was about my father's words, words that rang louder than cicadas in my ears. "She's nothing but a bastard." I've written condolence letters to mothers who lost sons in combat. I've carried Marines home in flag-draped coffins. I've stared down sandstorms in the desert and commanders who thought I didn't belong. And yet here, at a hall decorated with plastic tablecloths and helium balloons, my father reduced me to the accident of my birth. The thing about humiliation isn't just the insult itself. It's the silence that follows, the way people avoid your eyes, the way they decide whether to clap or stay still. That silence weighs more than the insult, and it pressed down heavy on my chest. For a moment, I thought about leaving, driving north on I-95 until the neon lights of Fredericksburg blurred into darkness, pretend the whole night was just another bad dream. But in the trunk of my Malibu lay a garment bag. Inside it, my blue dress uniform from the Quantico ceremonies that very morning. Polished shoes, rows of ribbons, 2 stars gleaming. I hadn't planned on wearing it again that day. I'd shoved it in the trunk out of habit, not intention. Yet now it sat there like something waiting on me. I remembered Mom, Maggie, long gone now. She used to say, "Laura, you don't have to fight every fight, but the ones you do pick, fight them clean." That sentence clung to me stronger than Dad's insult. Fight them clean. Not loud, not ugly, clean. So I stayed in the parking lot longer than I should have, cicadas sawing at the night air, letting their noise drown out the echo of my father's voice. because inside he was still celebrating, still holding Ashley like a trophy. And outside, I was deciding. I wasn't going to swing at him. I wasn't going to shout over the music or humiliate him back. That wasn't my way. But I also knew silence had a cost. Silence gave lies room to breathe. I thought about the uniform bag, heavy with truth, waiting in my trunk. Maybe fate had dragged me here for this moment. Maybe the story didn't begin with boot camp, or with medals tucked in a closet, or with the rank pinned on my collar. Maybe it began right here, with a father's toast meant to erase me, and the choice of whether I would let him succeed. I leaned my head back, eyes closed against the darkening sky. The cicadas buzzed. The old vets flicked their ashes, and I whispered under my breath, "Clean." I didn't know yet what that would mean. Not exactly, but I knew one thing. I wasn't done. Not tonight. The motel room I found that night smelled of bleach and stale smoke, the kind of stench that clings to curtains no matter how many times they're washed. I lay there on the stiff mattress, shoes still on, staring at the popcorn ceiling while trucks rumbled down Route 1. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it again. Dad's voice. Clear. Cruel. "She's nothing but a bastard." It dragged me back further than I wanted to go. Back before uniforms and medals, before Quantico, before Arlington funerals and desert nights. It pulled me all the way to Leach, Texas, 1970s. Our duplex rattled when the wind blew too hard. Summers were suffocating, the swamp cooler in the window barely coughing out enough relief to keep us from sticking to the kitchen chairs. Winters weren't much better. The walls leaked drafts that made my mother wrap herself in 2 cardigans just to cook. Mom, Maggie, worked double shifts at a diner off 34th Street. She came home smelling of fry grease and cheap coffee, hair pinned high, shoes kicked off at the door, ankles swollen. She was small, not more than 5'2", but her backbone was iron. She held me steady when everything else shook. Dad? He was a different story. He had an HVAC business, or at least the bones of one, but it never grew steady. He'd vanish for weeks. Sometimes he'd roar back into town in a Ford pickup, laughing like the world owed him a drink. Sometimes he wouldn't come back at all. When he did, he had a talent for turning good days sour with a single word. I remember being about 13, sitting at the dinner table, macaroni on chipped plates. He looked across at me and smirked. "You'll never be more than your mama." He thought it was an insult. He didn't realize it was the truest compliment he'd ever give me. Mom didn't flinch that night. She just kept eating, eyes lowered. But later, when I lay awake in my small room, I decided that if being no more than my mama meant carrying strength, grit, and decency, then that was exactly who I'd become. I learned early that if I wanted something, I'd have to earn it myself. At 12, I delivered papers in the cold dawn, fingers frozen around rubber-banded bundles. Summers, I mowed lawns until my palms blistered, raked leaves, washed cars, anything folks would pay a kid $2 an hour to do. My friends saved up for cassette tapes, BMX bikes, Friday nights at the skating rink. I saved for a bus ticket out. School was survival. Keep your head down, stay steady. I wasn't the brightest in the class, but I was consistent. Teachers noticed. One of them, Mrs. Dye, scrawled on a report card, "Laura follows through." At the time, it felt small. Later, those 3 words carried me further than any scholarship might have. Still, you can't shield a kid from everything. Mom tried to soften Dad's absence, but his presence, when he bothered to show up, cut sharper. He'd swagger in, smelling of beer and sawdust, voice booming, and in 5 minutes he could tear down what it took Mom weeks to build. One night I overheard them arguing. He accused her of being dead weight, of dragging him down. She shot back that at least she showed up, that at least their daughter would learn from her, not from him. I lay in bed, fists clenched, vowing I'd prove her right. By the time high school ended, my friends were splitting 2 ways. Some headed for Texas Tech on scholarships, others settling into early marriages with promises they weren't ready to keep. I had neither a ring nor a scholarship. What I had was a hard resolve and no patience left. One afternoon, I walked down Slide Road and into the recruiter's office. A Marine sergeant sat behind the desk, mustache thick, eyes sharp. He looked me up and down, then leaned back in his chair. "You sure about this, miss?" I was. I didn't even hesitate. I signed the papers right there. That night, Mom cried. Not the kind of tears that beg someone to stay, but the kind that knows leaving is the only way forward. She hugged me close, smelled of grease and tiredness, and whispered, "Laura, you want out? Earn it. And when you fight, fight clean." She repeated that phrase like a prayer, fight clean. So that August, I boarded a Greyhound bus. My suitcase was small. A pocket Bible from Mom sat tucked inside with $50 in cash. Everything else I left behind. I pressed my forehead against the window, watched the Texas plains unroll, and promised myself never again would anyone decide my worth. Those first weeks at Parris Island nearly broke me. The sand fleas were relentless, the heat soaked through your bones, and the drill instructors got in your face until you shook from head to toe. My legs burned, my throat ached from shouting back responses. Some nights, I thought I'd collapse. But every time my knees buckled, I remembered Dad's smirk. "You'll never be more than your mama." Every time I doubted myself, I thought of Mom carrying plates heavier than she was, still smiling at tired strangers in a booth. I didn't quit. I didn't even consider it. I cleaned rifles until my fingers bled. I learned to navigate by stars when compasses failed. I learned to follow orders, then, slowly, to give them. I wasn't fast, I wasn't flashy, but I was steady, and steadiness carried me. Years later, lying on that motel bed in Fredericksburg, Dad's insult ringing in my ears, I could still hear the cadence of boots on Parris Island gravel. I could still hear Mrs. Dye's handwriting. Laura follows through. That's how I'd lived my life, following through, brick by brick. And yet, a 78-year-old man in a cheap suit had dragged me back to that dinner table in Leach, Texas, with a single word, bastard. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and whispered into the dark, "You've earned every inch, Laura. Don't let him take that." The trucks kept rolling down Route 1 outside, low and steady. I sat there in the dim light, remembering the plain facts of a hard childhood that forged me. Remembering that insult at 13, the paper routes, the bus ticket, the first night at boot camp. Every detail built the steel in my bones, and it reminded me that no matter how sharp his words cut, they could never erase the truth of what I had built. But still, something had cracked open at that wedding, something raw, and I knew it wouldn't be sealed by silence. The years after Parris Island blurred together, but the rhythm of the Corps never left me. Early mornings began with boots laced tight, uniforms pressed sharp enough to cut, and black coffee swallowed fast before the first orders of the day. That steadiness became my armor. It carried me further than charm or talent ever could. While my friends back in Texas were settling into oil field jobs or car dealerships, I was learning to move entire battalions across oceans with nothing but clipboards, radios, and stubborn will. I was stationed at Camp Lejeune in those early days, crammed into cinder block barracks that smelled perpetually of sweat and bleach. The drains in the showers rusted red. Chow tasted like cardboard. Nights bled into mornings, and still we kept going. I wasn't the kind of Marine who drew attention with a loud laugh or swagger. What I built instead was a reputation. Show up, follow through, get the job done. Promotions didn't come fast, but they came steady. First lieutenant, captain, then major. Each new bar pinned on my collar wasn't marked by fireworks or celebration, but by the quiet nod of a fellow Marine saying, "Ma'am, you're solid." Solid, that word meant more than any medal. I remember Okinawa in the thick of summer. The humidity clung to your skin like an extra shirt. Mosquitoes buzzed loud enough to drown out thought. We ran drills until midnight, sweat stinging our eyes. I kept an old fan rattling on my desk, but it never cooled the room. What I remember most, though, weren't the drills or the endless paperwork stacked like bricks on my desk. It was the letters. Young Marines too homesick or too proud to write home themselves would hand me scraps of words. Tell my mom I'm okay. Tell my wife I miss her. I wrote those letters carefully, folding them neat, sending them out across oceans. And sometimes, when the loneliness cracked them open, I just listened, sat with them while they cried. None of that ever made it into evaluations, but it mattered more than any score. By my 30s, I was training officer candidates at Quantico. I wore through 3 pairs of boots pacing those fields. My voice went hoarse, barking orders into the humid Virginia air. But I learned something important. Leadership wasn't about yelling. It was about listening, about standing steady when storms came. about knowing when to bite back a harsh word and when to let silence speak. War leaves marks, though. Desert tours where the heat warped the horizon until rifles burned to the touch. Nights in canvas tents where sand ground between your teeth and wind howled so fierce you doubted the tent would stay standing. I wrote condolence letters by flashlight, each one heavier than the last. I stood beside flag-draped coffins, saluted until my arm ached, and swore I would never let their names fade. The promotions kept coming. Colonel, Brigadier General, eventually Major General. The kind of rank people said wasn't supposed to happen for women, not in the Marines, not often. But I wasn't chasing stars. I was chasing steadiness, following through. Most of my medals sit in a box, tucked in the back of my closet, ribbons faded, edges bent. The real rewards came in smaller moments. Gunnery Sergeant Ortiz growling, "Ma'am, the kids watch what you do, not what you say." Lieutenant Chen whispering before deployment, "General, I'll be okay if you're okay." Those words stuck to me. They mattered more than the shine of brass. But leadership also meant paperwork stacked taller than rifles, meetings that stretched past midnight, and the constant reminder that one mistake could cost lives. The weight of command was steady, relentless, and lonely. I carried it because it was mine. I earned it. And no one, no drill instructor, no enemy, no politician, and certainly not my father, could take that from me. That truth kept me standing through decades of hard miles. From the swamps of Lejeune to the dust storms of Iraq, from Okinawa's sticky nights to Quantico's crisp mornings, I built a career brick by brick. No shortcuts, no favors. And yet, standing in that Legion Hall weeks ago, hearing my father cut me down to nothing more than my birth, it felt like for a moment, all of it could vanish. That's the power of family. They know the cracks in your foundation, and they know how to press them. But I also knew something else. Cracks don't define you. The mortar does. The work, the years, the showing up. That's what holds a life together. And mine was solid, whether my father saw it or not. The wedding invitation had arrived months earlier, cream-colored envelope with my name misspelled, Laura Whitaker. I'd laughed when I opened it. That was Dad all over, never bothering with the small things. I hadn't planned on going. 54 years had taught me that some roads weren't worth walking. But then Aunt June called. Sweet June, who had never once turned her back on me. She'd slipped me lunch money in high school, driven me to the bus station when I left for Paris Island, called every Christmas no matter what base I was on. If she asked me to show up, I would. So the morning of the wedding, I was at Quantico, overseeing a promotion ceremony. My blue dress uniform gleamed, 2 stars bright on my collar. Families clapped, cameras flashed. A Marine's mom hugged me so tight I could smell the starch in her blouse. When the ceremony ended, I unpinned the stars and hung the uniform in its garment bag. For a moment, I thought about leaving it there in my office, but something told me to put it in the trunk of my Chevy. I didn't know why at the time. The drive to Fredericksburg was the same as always. The crawl of I-95, brake lights glowing red like an endless river, billboards flashing ads for Cracker Barrel and car dealerships. I stopped for gas at an Exxon, bought a coffee that tasted of burnt rubber, and kept going. By the time I pulled into the Legion Hall parking lot, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky in orange and violet streaks. Pickup trucks and minivans filled the lot. Denise's stretch limo stuck out like a sore thumb. I didn't wear my uniform inside. Instead, I slipped on a plain navy dress and flats. Nothing fancy. I didn't want eyes on me. This was Dad's day, not mine. Let him have it. Inside, the hall smelled of barbecue and cheap perfume. Plastic tablecloths stretched across rows of folding tables. The DJ tested speakers with another Conway Twitty track. Cousins whispered behind napkins. Some waved, some didn't. I nodded, kept moving. Denise glowed in her rhinestone gown, straight from a department store window. She hugged me stiffly, perfume too sweet. "Laura," she said, voice pitched high. "So glad you made it." Her daughter Ashley stood beside her, cheeks pink from too much blush, a wine glass dangling from her hand. She smirked like she already knew the role she'd play that night. I got myself a coffee in a styrofoam cup, stirred it though there was nothing to stir, and sat in the back, near the exit. That's when the toasts began. Dad stood in front of everyone, hair slicked back, suit sagging at the shoulders. He raised a glass, and the room hushed. "Family," he began, "is what gives a man pride." My chest tightened. For a heartbeat, I thought maybe, just maybe, he would say something kind. But then his finger pointed straight at me. "She's nothing but a bastard." And everything shifted. The heat of the parking lot wrapped around me like a suffocating blanket. The cicadas screamed from the trees, their steady rhythm somehow louder than the music leaking from the Legion Hall. I leaned against the trunk of my Malibu, staring at the garment bag inside as if it were alive. My blue dress uniform sat there, silent but heavy, as though waiting for me to make up my mind. My phone buzzed in my pocket. For a long moment I thought about ignoring it, but the name that flashed across the screen stopped me. Retired Major General Samuel Ortiz. I hadn't called him in years, yet when my hand shook, he was the one I dialed. "General," he answered on the second ring, his voice gravelly but warm. "Didn't expect to hear from you this late." I swallowed, fighting the tightness in my throat. "Sam, I'm at my father's wedding." He stood up in front of everyone, called me a bastard. Then he pulled Ashley close and said she was his real daughter. There was a pause on the line. I could hear him exhale, the faint crackle of a match as he lit one of his cigars. "He's still the same old Hal, huh?" Ortiz finally said, his tone dry as desert sand. "Worse," I muttered. Another pause. "What are you thinking?" I stared at the garment bag. Part of me wants to walk back in there wearing it. 2 stars on my collar, ribbons, polished shoes, everything. But part of me wonders if that's petty, if I'd just be proving his point. Ortiz's voice steadied, iron-wrapped in calm. "You earned that uniform, ma'am. Every stitch of it. Wearing it isn't petty, it's the truth. Don't say much. Don't raise your voice. Just be who you are. That's more than enough." I closed my eyes, breathing in the heavy night air. I don't want to humiliate anyone. "Then don't," he said simply. "But don't let a lie stand either. Your old man can shout. Denise can brag. Ashley can play her role, but that uniform, you earned it, and no one, no matter how loud, can erase that. Let them see it. Let them know." His words sank deep, cutting through the doubt. For a long while, neither of us spoke. Only the cicadas filled the silence, their buzzing almost like a drum line marching me forward. Finally, Ortiz said, "Whatever you decide, ma'am, I know you'll do it clean." Clean, Mom's word. His word, my word. "Thanks, Sam," I whispered, then ended the call. I stood there a long time, staring at the trunk. A train horn wailed, somewhere far off, low and mournful. My fingers finally found the zipper. The smell of wool and starch rose like memory itself. Piece by piece, I began to put it on. The shirt was crisp, collar tight. The jacket buttoned slow, each click of brass like a heartbeat. Metals pinned in perfect rows. The 2 silver stars gleamed even in the dim parking lot light. Last came the shoes, polished enough to catch the glow of the street lamps. When I looked at myself in the rearview mirror, the reflection staring back wasn't just Laura from Leach, Texas. Not just Maggie's daughter. Not just Hal's bastard. It was Major General Laura Whitaker, United States Marine Corps. I squared my shoulders, straightened my cover, and whispered to my own reflection. "You didn't come here to win a scene. You came here to stand in the truth." Then I shut the trunk and walked toward the hall. The blast of air conditioning hit me as I pushed open the doors. But colder still was the silence that followed my entrance. The DJ's fiddle track died mid-note. Forks hovered in midair. Every head turned. Heels clicked against linoleum, echoing like rifle shots in the sudden quiet. Fluorescent lights caught the shine of brass and silver on my jacket. I walked steady, each step a declaration. A cousin muttered, "Good Lord." Another whispered, "That's 2 stars, isn't it?" Dad froze at the head table. Denise's arm looped through his. His smile faltered, stiffened into something uglier. Ashley, mid-laugh with a circle of cousins, went pale. Her eyes flicked to the stars, then to my face. She stumbled a step back, wine glass trembling in her hand. "Oh my God," she stammered, voice cracking for everyone to hear. She is my general." The words rippled through the room, louder than any toast. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. When I reached the front, I turned to face the crowd. My tone was calm, even, measured. "I came tonight to wish my father a good life. I didn't come for speeches, and I didn't come for insults. I am who I am, and I worked for it." Nobody breathed. Even the ice machine behind the bar seemed to stop humming. I glanced toward Ashley, who stood frozen, cheeks pale. Ashley will handle any marine business at the office, not here. Her lips parted, but no words came. She nodded once, quick and jerky. Then I raised my glass of water, steady hand catching the fluorescent glow. Here's to making things right when we can. I took a slow sip, set it down, and waited. The silence stretched. Then Aunt June broke it, her voice thick with tears. "Laura, honey." She clapped. Once, twice. Others followed, hesitant at first, then louder, hands smacking against palms until the room thundered. The old vets in the back straightened in their chairs, saluting sharp. A woman from church dabbed her eyes. Even the young bartender in his bow tie vest stood taller, his chest swelling with quiet pride. Dad didn't clap. His jaw locked tight, eyes narrowed. Denise forced a smile that cracked at the edges. But it didn't matter. The truth stood plain in front of everyone. I didn't linger. I wasn't there to gloat. I stepped away from the head table, heels clicking again as I walked through the crowd. Each handshake, each nod, each whispered, "Thank you, General," was more than enough. I reached the door, opened it, and stepped back into the night. The cicadas buzzed louder than the applause, the air thick with summer heat. For the first time in a long time, I felt something unclench in my chest. I wasn't clean because I'd humiliated anyone. I was clean because I'd stood steady in the truth. And that, I knew, was just the beginning. The night air was thick with honeysuckle and smoke when I stepped back outside the Legion Hall. Cicadas screamed like static, filling the silence I carried in my chest. I leaned against my Malibu, letting the applause inside fade into a murmur behind me. The first to follow me out was an older man in a faded Vietnam vet ball cap. His gait was stiff, knees swollen from wounds that never fully healed. He stuck out his hand, voice rough but steady. "Proud of you, ma'am. We needed someone like you back then." I shook his hand firmly, eyes steady on his. "Thank you, and thank you for your service." A woman I half remembered from church potlucks years ago pressed my hand between hers. Her eyes brimmed with tears. "Your mama would be so proud, Laura." Before I could reply, she turned back inside, overwhelmed. Then came Ashley. She hesitated near the doorway, clutching her clutch purse like a lifeline. Her eyes darted to me, then down to the asphalt. The bravado she'd worn inside, the blush, the smirk, the pride, was gone. She was just a 26-year-old kid now, her voice small. I didn't know. I didn't realize. I studied her face, the wine still on her breath, the fear trembling behind her mascara. She wasn't an enemy. She was young, reckless, and now confronted with a truth bigger than she could spin. "You don't have to know everything yet," I told her evenly, "but you do have to be honest. We'll talk at Quantico. Bring your receipts. Bring the truth. You'll be fine if you're honest." She swallowed hard, nodded once, and whispered, "Yes, ma'am." Then she hurried past me into the night, heels clicking fast. Denise wasn't far behind. Her perfume hit me before her glare did, sweet, cloying, heavy. She didn't speak, didn't even slow down. She just swept past, eyes flashing with a mix of rage and humiliation. Her shoes struck the pavement like hammers. Dad never came out, not that night. The lot slowly emptied, voices fading into the dark until only the hum of the streetlights and the buzz of insects kept me company. I climbed into my Malibu, uniform still sharp, hands resting on the wheel. My phone buzzed against the console. Voicemail. It was from him. I didn't listen until later. When I finally did, his voice was unsteady, slurred maybe, but more from regret than drink. "Laura, I went too far. Shouldn't have said it. I don't know how to fix it." Then the line clicked dead. No goodbye, no sorry, just words hanging limp. The next morning, Quantico was the same as always. Gray lights spilling over the base, Marines in formation, boots striking pavement in crisp cadence. I sat behind my desk with a stack of files waiting. And there it was. Ashley's memo, right on top. Falsified travel receipts. Nothing catastrophic, not yet, but serious enough. I picked it up, read it line by line. She'd padded her mileage claims, added per diem she wasn't owed. A rookie mistake, maybe careless, maybe desperate. I could imagine Denise whispering in her ear about knowing her worth or taking advantage when she could. But the Corps didn't tolerate shortcuts. I signed it by the book. No cruelty, no favoritism, just the truth. The kind of action that stripped away excuses and forced you to decide what kind of Marine you wanted to be. Later that day, one of my aides brought me coffee. He hesitated before setting it down, eyes flicking to my face. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I heard about what happened last night." Of course he had. Marines talk. Stories flow faster through chow lines and smoke pits than they ever do through official channels. I gave a small nod. "Then you also know I showed up to work on time this morning." "Yes, ma'am." He looked almost relieved. He didn't mention it again. None of them did. Not directly. But I could feel the ripple of it. The way eyes lingered a little longer in salute. The way younger officers stood straighter when I passed. That evening, I drove home exhausted. Uniform jacket folded neatly across the passenger seat. On the radio, static fought with country songs. I didn't pay much attention. My thoughts circled the same question. Was Dad's voicemail an apology, or just a man trying to patch cracks in his pride? When I reached home, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the memo I'd signed earlier. Ashley's name, typed bold at the top. I thought about her pale face outside the hall, her whispered, "Yes, ma'am." Was it fear talking, or the start of a course correction? The Corps would decide in its own way, but part of me hoped she'd take the lesson. That she'd learn steadiness mattered more than applause. That she'd learn what Mom taught me, fight clean. Still, I knew Denise would fight this. The glare she'd thrown in the parking lot wasn't just anger, it was warning. She'd push, cajole, maybe even beg Dad to intervene. And Dad, Hal Whitaker, was a man who had spent his life avoiding accountability. Would he resist Denise, or would he step in, trying to twist things in Ashley's favor? I wasn't sure, but I knew this. If he tried, he'd find me standing firm. Not shouting, not swinging, just steady, brick by brick. That night, I dreamed of Mom. She stood at the diner counter, apron smeared, hair pinned back, her eyes tired but shining. She looked at me and said the same thing she always did. "Fight clean, Laura. Fight clean." When I woke, the sun was breaking over Quantico, painting the base in gold. A new day, orders waiting, Marines waiting, and me, steady as ever, ready to show up. The wedding was over. The insult was spoken. The crowd had seen the truth, but I had the feeling this wasn't finished. Not with Dad, not with Ashley, not with Denise. Something in me knew the reckoning had only begun. The weekend after the wedding, I drove out to the cemetery where my mother was buried. The grass was trimmed neat. Flags fluttered gently between rows of stones. The morning sun was warm, but not yet punishing, the air smelling faintly of honeysuckle. I parked my Chevy beneath an oak and walked the familiar path. Mom's stone was simple, just her name, Maggie Whitaker, and the years that never felt like enough. I stood there with my hands clasped behind my back, uniform jacket buttoned tight. For a long moment, I said nothing, just breathed, just remembered. Finally, I spoke aloud, my voice steady. "It's done, Mama." He said his piece, and I said mine, but I said it clean. The breeze shifted, stirring my hair, carrying with it the faint sweetness of honeysuckle. For a second, it felt like she was answering, like she was proud. I let that be enough. Back at Quantico, life settled into its steady grind. Morning staff meetings dragged too long. Paperwork stacked higher than my coffee cup. Young officers stumbled through their first briefings. It was the rhythm I'd built my life on, showing up, following through, brick by brick. Nobody mentioned the wedding directly, but I knew word had traveled. Marines are a quiet network. Gossip slips faster through chow lines and smoke pits than through official emails. I could see it in the way people looked at me, more respect maybe, but also curiosity. A story had been born, and I was at the center of it, whether I wanted to be or not. I refused to feed it. I didn't tell my version. I didn't justify or explain. I just kept working, kept leading. That was the only way forward. But beneath the surface, ripples spread. Denise didn't call me, but I heard her voice anyway, through cousins, through whispered reports from back home. She told anyone who'd listened that I'd humiliated her daughter, that I'd twisted things to make Ashley look small. She didn't mention the memo, of course. She didn't mention that Ashley's own choices had landed her on my desk. No, she painted me as the villain, cold, ruthless, out to crush her daughter's future. And Dad, he stayed quiet, too quiet. After that voicemail, nothing. Not a call, not a letter, just silence. I pictured Denise in his ear, feeding his pride, stoking his anger. But I also wondered if maybe, just maybe, he was ashamed. Ashley herself walked a different path. She came to my office a week later, travel receipts in hand. Her shoulders were stiff, her eyes rimmed red. She placed the folder on my desk and whispered, "I want to fix it." I studied her, weighing truth against fear. Fixing it means owning it, not blaming Denise, not making excuses. You ready for that? Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. Yes, ma'am. It wasn't confidence, it was something better, resolve. I signed the corrective action, sent it through proper channels, and let the process work. No favoritism, no cruelty, just accountability. Still, I could feel Denise circling like a hawk. She wouldn't let this go, not when her pride was on the line. One evening, I sat alone in my office long after most had left. The base was quiet, the only sound the hum of fluorescent lights. On my desk sat a photograph of Mom, taken at the diner. Apron smudged, hair pinned up, eyes shining despite exhaustion. I touched the frame lightly and whispered, "Fight clean." That phrase had carried me across deserts, through funerals, into boardrooms, and it would carry me now, through the storm brewing at home. Aunt June called later that night. Her voice was gentle, as it always was. "Honey, I don't know what Denise is saying, but don't let it get to you. Folks who matter, they see the truth." "I know," I said softly, "but it still stings." "Course it does. Words always do. But listen, your daddy's not talking much these days, not even to me. I think he's wrestling with himself." Her words stuck with me. Wrestling with himself. I wanted to believe it. Wanted to believe there was something left in him that could bend toward decency. Weeks passed. The story of the wedding slipped from the front of people's minds, but I could feel it linger beneath the surface. A quiet test of character. For me, for Ashley, even for Dad. Then came the notice. I was to preside over a change of command ceremony for one of our training regiments. Families would gather on the parade deck, flags snapping in the breeze, the Marine band sharp and precise. It was the kind of event that demanded steadiness, demanded presence. As I read the order, I felt a ripple of unease. I didn't know why at first, but then it came to me. This was the kind of public space where Dad might appear again, where Denise might try something, where Ashley's reputation could either steady or sink. I sat back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from the weight of what was coming. The wedding had been a skirmish, the cemetery a pause, but the next battle, I sensed, would unfold on the parade deck, under sunlight, under flags, under the watchful eyes of Marines and families alike. And this time it wouldn't be about my humiliation. It would be about whether truth, once spoken, could stand firm against silence, pride, and denial. I closed my eyes, hearing Mom's voice as clear as if she were beside me. "You don't have to fight every fight, but the ones you do pick, fight them clean." I whispered into the quiet, "I'm ready." The morning of the change of command ceremony dawned crisp and cool, a rare gift in Virginia. Flags snapped sharp in the breeze. The Marine band tuned their instruments, notes ringing across the parade deck with precise energy. Rows of folding chairs lined the field, already filling with families in Sunday best, mothers tugging on little boys' collars, fathers snapping pictures, grandparents shading their eyes against the sun. I adjusted my uniform, every crease exact, every ribbon aligned like a ledger of years. The weight of 2 silver stars pressed steady on my shoulders. My boots clicked against the pavement as I walked to the podium, the crowd rising to attention. The speeches were routine. Recognition for the outgoing commander, a welcome for the incoming. No flourishes, no wasted words. The Corps didn't need spectacle. It needed steadiness. My voice carried firm, calm, even as my heart beat heavier than usual. When the ceremony ended, families swarmed the parade deck. Children tugged at parents' sleeves. Marines hugged loved ones. Cameras flashed in the bright sun. I stepped down to shake hands, to meet families, to do what leaders do, be visible, be steady, be present. The line was long, faces blurring one into another. Then, near the back, I saw him. Dad. His sports coat hung loose, at least a size too big. His tie sat crooked against his shirt, collar frayed. His hair was thinner than I remembered, his face lined deeper. But it was him, standing small among Marines and families, waiting his turn like any other guest. He hadn't brought Denise. He hadn't brought Ashley. He stood alone, hands shoved awkwardly into his pockets. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Part of me wanted to turn away, to avoid what I knew was coming. But I didn't. I kept the line moving until he finally stood in front of me. He didn't smirk, didn't puff his chest. He didn't crack a joke to cover his nerves. He just looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. Then he stuck out his hand. His voice was rough, but clear enough for those around us to hear. "My daughter," he said, "General Laura Whitaker. Not bastard, not nothing, my daughter." The words landed heavier than his insult ever had. Not because they erased the past, they didn't, but because they were public, spoken plain, witnessed by others. I shook his hand firmly. "Thank you," I said. Nothing more. My voice was steady, though inside something shifted. Aunt June was there too. She pressed forward, tears welling in her eyes. She hugged us both, whispering, "About time, Hal. About time." He didn't hug me. I didn't cry. There was no movie ending, no flood of reconciliation, just a small correction spoken aloud, enough to tilt the weight inside me. We let go of each other's hands, and he stepped aside, letting the next family forward. A mother introduced her son, a young Marine fresh out of training. The rhythm of the ceremony resumed, as though nothing monumental had happened. But I knew better. For the rest of the afternoon, Dad lingered at the edge of the crowd. He didn't approach again, didn't try to explain or apologize, but his presence said enough. He'd chosen to stand there quietly, without Denise's shadow or Ashley's bravado. Just him, stripped of pretense. Later, when the band struck its final note and the families dispersed, I walked back toward my office. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky in amber. Aunt June caught up with me, squeezing my arm. "He's trying, honey. In his own clumsy way, he's trying." I gave her a faint smile. Maybe. Inside, I wasn't sure what to make of it. Did those words mean he finally saw me? Or were they just another performance, a way to save face among strangers? But as I sat at my desk that evening, the bass quiet again, I realized it didn't matter. What mattered was, the truth had been spoken in public. For once, he hadn't used his voice to cut me down. He'd used it to lift me up, however awkwardly, however late. That was enough. Ashley's situation wound its way through channels in the weeks that followed. She owned up to her mistake, accepted the consequences. It wasn't career-ending. It was a hard lesson, the kind every Marine faces sooner or later. I gave her no special treatment, but I didn't crush her either. She learned that the Corps doesn't bend for pride, it bends for truth. Denise stayed silent, at least toward me. I'm sure she fumed in private, but she didn't call, didn't confront. Maybe Dad had drawn a line with her after all, maybe not. Either way, her silence was its own kind of surrender. One evening, after a long day of briefings and reports, I sat in my office and thought about all of it. The wedding, the uniform, the ceremony, Dad's words. It struck me that sometimes reconciliation doesn't come with hugs or apologies. Sometimes it comes with a single sentence spoken in public, enough to shift the ground beneath your feet. That night, I slept better than I had in months. The weeks after the change of command ceremony carried a different weight. The days looked the same, meetings that stretched too long, stacks of files, the hum of Quantico at dawn, but something inside me had shifted. For the first time in years, Dad's voice wasn't lodged in my chest like a splinter. I still remembered the insult, the wedding, the way silence cut sharper than laughter, but now there was also another memory. Him standing in front of Marines and families, his hand outstretched, calling me my daughter. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't enough to rewrite decades of absence or the pain he'd caused Mom, but it was a correction, small and public, and sometimes that's all you get. Sometimes that's all you need. Ashley's case wound its way through official channels. She accepted her punishment, restitution, counseling, extra duties. It humbled her. She stopped walking with that reckless smirk. She started showing up early, staying late, asking questions instead of pretending she had all the answers. One afternoon, she appeared at my office door, clutching a stack of papers. "Ma'am," she said carefully, "I wanted you to know I'm making it right." I nodded, motioned her in. "Sit." She perched on the edge of the chair, eyes flicking nervously to the medals on my shelf, the files stacked neat on my desk. I thought if I looked good enough, if I impressed people, it would mean I belonged. But I was wrong. I know that now. Her honesty cut through the room sharper than any reprimand. Belonging doesn't come from shortcuts, Ashley, I told her. It comes from showing up, doing the work, brick by brick. There are no trophies handed out for pretending. She nodded, eyes wet. I get that now. Thank you for not... She faltered, searching for words. For not ruining me. I wasn't here to ruin you, I said softly. I was here to remind you what the Corps demands. Honesty, accountability, nothing more, nothing less. When she left, I saw a different posture in her shoulders. Straighter, steadier. Maybe she'd stumble again, maybe not. But she was learning. That was enough. Denise remained a shadow on the edges, her silence louder than any words. I heard from Aunt June that she'd tried to stir Dad against me, but he hadn't bitten. He wasn't calling me often, but neither was he joining her chorus. Maybe he was tired of battles. Maybe, in his own halting way, he was learning to choose differently. One Saturday, I drove back to Leach, Texas. The duplex I'd grown up in was long gone, replaced by a strip mall and a laundromat. I parked across the street and watched families carry groceries to their cars, kids tugging on sleeves, parents sighing in the heat. I thought of Mom, her apron, her hair pinned back, her tired smile, and I whispered under my breath, I kept it clean, Mama. The wind stirred, carrying dust across the lot, and I let myself feel something like peace. Back at Quantico, life rolled on. Early mornings, polished boots, cadets learning the rhythm of the Corps. I carried on as I always had, steady, consistent, present. But now there was a lesson humming beneath it all, one I carried from that wedding hall to the parade deck, to my mother's grave. Dignity doesn't need a crowd, but sometimes a crowd needs to see dignity, so they'll remember it when it's their turn to stand steady. The insult my father hurled at me will never vanish. Words like that never do. They echo through years, waiting to catch you when you're weakest. But I learned something standing in that hall, in that parking lot, in that uniform. No insult, no denial, no silence can erase a life built brick by brick. Blood isn't about who shouts the loudest at a wedding toast. Blood is about who shows up, even late, even clumsy, but honest. And worth? Worth isn't granted by fathers, or by applause, or by borrowed pride. Worth is earned in the quiet hours, in the choices no one sees, in the steadiness that carries you through desert heat and family storms alike. When people ask me now about that night, I don't tell them much. I don't describe the smirk on Ashley's lips, or the burn in my throat, or the silence that suffocated the hall. I just say, I showed up, and I fought clean. Because in the end, that's the only truth that matters. So if you're listening to this, if you've ever carried an insult like a stone in your chest, hear me. Don't let it stick. Don't let it define you. Stand steady. Fight clean. Build your life brick by brick, and don't hand anyone the power to erase it. That's what dignity teaches. That's what I've learned. And that's what I'll carry until my last salute.